Hey everybody, welcome back to Crafting and Crime Daily. It's Thursday. Yes, no live trials going on to recap. That's what I usually do. I'm your host, Rebecca. Don't forget to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe. Why not? What do you got to lose? It doesn't cost a thing, it's absolutely free. So I'm going to talk about day 2 of the Miller hearing. Well, no, it's actually day 3. They had 2 days of this hearing last week, which I covered in part 1, and I'll put the link to that up here in the eye, one of these areas up here. Just click on it, save it to watch later, and it's interesting stuff. So, day 3, the defense was putting on their case in chief. This is a Miller hearing. A Miller hearing is where when a defendant is a juvenile and they commit an offense that could get them life in prison without the possibility of parole, they are entitled to a Miller hearing, where there's several factors that the psychologist who examines the person will take into account, or that the court can take into account in determining whether this person should have the possibility of parole. Yeah. So there's several factors that go into this Miller hearing. They take in the maturity of the defendant, the brain development, the home life. There's a lot of factors that go into this, and whether the person can be rehabilitated. Yeah. So the defense's entire case rests on this one psychologist they put on the stand. And he had a lot of interesting things to say. There's so much that has come out now about these parents. James and Jennifer Crumley, they are in jail awaiting their trial for their responsibility in this Oxford school shooting. The school shooting happened back in November of 2021. There were 4 students that were murdered, and there was an attempted murder on several other students. And in the first video, I cover who the victims were, and we talk a lot about the actual shooting in that video. But today we're going to talk about the psychologist who examined Ethan Crumley over a lengthy period of time. He had several visits, in-person visits with Ethan Crumley. Some were by Zoom, some were in person. He did quite a bit of testing, and I'm going to talk about all of his findings. So one of the things he talked about, and a lot of his sources are through school records, and he's reviewed all the school records. He's reviewed the other psychology, the state's psychology report. He's reviewed school records. Did I say school records? He's reviewed school records. He's reviewed medical records, the journal that Ethan Crumley kept. He's reviewed the 5,000 plus pages of text messages that were between Ethan Crumley and this friend of his. And like I said, he's done all this testing. So he had some conclusions at the result of all of this review and these tests, and we're going to get to that. So the first thing he talks about is his childhood. Apparently, this psychologist went out and actually interviewed some of the Crumley neighbors, and they said, even as early as 6 years old, Ethan would cross the street, come over to these people's homes, and they'd say, "Well, where are your parents?" And he said, I don't know where they are." And sometimes this would be like maybe during a thunderstorm, or like he was scared, and he so he went to find somebody he could be with. He didn't know where his parents were. Then the doctor talked about how Ethan Crumley spent countless hours watching uh, The Walking Dead. That Walking Dead, they just need to just get rid of that show because I don't. It's probably not. They don't still make that show, do they? Because every time I see a murderer, they watch The Walking Dead. So anyway, he spent countless hours playing video games, Assassin's Creed. Um, he mentioned a couple, Assassin's Creed and one other one. And interestingly enough, now Assassin's Creed is a parkour game. It's not, it doesn't, I don't know. I don't see how that would cause you to have a break with reality. But in any case, his obsession with these video games and Grand Theft Auto. Now that's a little violent, yeah. So his obsession with these video games, led him to start watching these death scenes on the internet, and it got to the point where he was putting himself in those scenes, and he would become part of the scene, and he couldn't distinguish reality from the truth. Okay. Then he talked about um, frequent references that in the records that he reviewed where Ethan actually had to be the one to interrupt his parent threatening to commit suicide. One or the other. Sometimes it was mom, sometimes it was dad. Now that what kind of life is that? Listen, I led that life. I my mother used to do it to me. I'm gonna kill myself, and you'd have to go run over and take all over the knives and put the pills and yeah, okay. So then he called him a feral child, Feral. So a feral child is one who's been abandoned emotionally. And he says when that happens, these kids, their development is arrested. They they have lack of social skills and they become misfits in society. Then he says his parents were just not attuned to what was going on. And by that, he means there was several references where Ethan was crying out for help. He asked his parents, "Can you get me to a counselor?" He told his parents he was hearing voices and he needed to see a therapist. Never happened. Nobody ever got him to a therapist. There were there was one time where the parents woke up and Ethan was sleeping in their room. And the father said, "Did you give him a sleeping pill or something?" And she said, "No, I gave him some melatonin." So there was another time, like the night before the shooting, they get into an argument over his grades and they lock him out of the house. So what does he do while he's locked out of the house? He starts filming his manifesto, like what he's going to do the next day. He's going to shoot people and kill them. And he's got to go to prison for the rest of his life. So much the way Taylor Shabisnes the other day, the psychologist that examined her said the same thing. You know, when you have these people that are mentally ill at the time they commit the crime, that doesn't mean they're insane. It doesn't meet the insanity defense, not guilty by reason of insanity, but they still have a mental disease or defect at the time they committed the crime. So with Taylor Shabisnes, same thing. The judge or the psychologist recommended a brain scan to see if there is any brain damage. In Taylor Shabisnes's case, it would have been from years of methamphetamine use. In in Ethan's case, this psychologist pointed out there were at least a couple of times where he hit his head. He said there was one time where they were out at a strawberry patch and he just remembers going unconscious. And when he woke up, he said, "What happened?" And they said, "You took a blow to the head." No, I don't know what that's all about, but head injury. Then another time they even have a video of this. He's at a diner. He walks into this diner and he falls and hits his head. Now the owners of the diner wanted to call 911 and get him taken to the hospital. I mean, of course. Parents said no, no, no. So whether or not he had a head injury, nobody knows. So this doctor did a series of 15 psychological tests, including, MMPI and all these tests that they can do. So the first test he did was to see whether he was competent to stand trial. And he says, yes, he can assist the counsel with his defense and he understands the proceedings, which is all you need to do to assess competency to stand trial. But then he gave him a number of other tests to test his orientation. Now, and he concluded that he was oriented times three. And what does that mean? Oriented times three. It means that you know what year it is. You're pretty good with that. You know what day it is. And you know who different people are, like who's the president? Okay. So he's oriented, like he's not disoriented. Then he said that other tests that he gave indicated that he had a very high level of stress in his life, that he had one of the higher scales for anxiety, and he had obsessive compulsive disorder. He was obsessed with death. Now, he also tested his IQ, and his IQ he tested in the average range. So he said he had an average IQ, average intelligence, and he had a high degree of paranoia and hallucinations. So this doctor's diagnosis, based on the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual that the psychologists and psychiatrists use to make diagnoses. And they look for clusters of symptoms to match the diagnosis. So his diagnosis for Ethan Crumley was major depressive disorder with psychosis. Interesting. He talked a lot about impact bias, and this was in the realm of the school. He said the teachers, they're, and he says it's not racism, but when you have a particular bias, for example, you know, if you're not expecting someone to do bad things, you don't look for them. Now, more often than not, the blacks are looked for bad behavior. In other words, you're biased. You think you know you're going to expect that from them. You're not expecting it from the young white kids, so you're not even looking for it. And I thought that was interesting. Now, I don't know what impact that will have on the judge's decision. The judge is also black. Interestingly enough, during the cross examination, the it's not going to go over well. The state accidentally called the witness judge. I was like, oh God, you did not. No. And it was during all that talk about the racial, whether it's impact bias, racial bias. Yeah, not good. So anyway, they showed a video of Ethan after he was arrested where he was crying and he was like, God, why didn't you stop it? You could have saved her. And I didn't get the context of this, like when this video was taken. I don't think it was right after his arrest, because right after his arrest, he was pretty calm. But he's not calm here. It keeps repeating those phrases over and over again. And this psychologist said he was in the throes of psychosis. Now, at the conclusion of his testimony, he said he felt like there were several issues with Ethan Crumley. One, that he had a complex childhood full of trauma, that he had violence in the home. Now, I don't know what he meant by violence. Did he mean because they tried to commit suicide, that was violence in the home? I didn't get that. I don't know what he based that on. That he suffers from mental illness, that he had a lack of resources. In other words, he never got the mental health care that he needed. So, lack of resources, neglect on behalf of the parents and the school. He talked about how schools should they should have counselors that are at a ratio of 1 to 250. And he quoted this as something that comes from counselors, some kind of counselors association, that's the recommendation. One counselor for 250 kids. In this particular school, during the time that Ethan was there, one year it was 1 to 1,000 kids. Another year it was 1 to 900, and at the time of the shooting it was 1 to 900. There's not enough counseling in that school for the kids that need it. So he also said that in the school system, there were several failures to recognize this mental health issue that he had. And the final issue was that he had access to weapons. Something that was interesting that Ethan told the psychologist was that his father bought him the 9mm gun out of spite towards the mother. Now, I don't know why. And then that his mother took him to the shooting range out of spite towards the father. So it sounds like the parents were struggling at home. They apparently would force him, tell him, if we're going to get a divorce or if we ever end up in a divorce, you're going to have to choose which parent you want to live with. And yeah, so conclusion that this psychologist made was that there is a possibility that Ethan Crumley could be rehabilitated. Now, in cross examination, apparently this psychologist had prepared one report when this was first to go to a Miller hearing, and then it got canceled and rescheduled. So between the time it got canceled and rescheduled, he authored a second report. And he tried to explain on cross-examination that this is a living document. He says, I spent 6 more hours with Ethan, so I updated the report. Well, what the state was trying to show is that he was using phrases in his report that were blocked and copied from another report or 2 other reports, and that he was just saying the same thing. And so he was pointing out everything that the psychologist missed. He didn't talk about this, she didn't talk about that, which he did. He probably didn't need to talk about all those things. I mean, if he had talked about every single thing that he had reviewed, including 5,000 pages of text messages, he would, as it is, his report was like 69 pages. Yeah, he said, you wouldn't, you need a truck to get the report in here. No. So that was the conclusion of day 3 of the testimony in the Miller hearing. And to my chagrin, the defense had no other witnesses. So now it's time for the state's rebuttal witness, which is going to be a psychologist that they had examined Ethan Crumley. However, they were out of time. So the judge said he had no more time on the calendar that week, and he reset the hearing to commence, I thought he said August 19th. So it's a ways away. We have a few more weeks before we're going to revisit this whole Ethan Crumley thing, because I do want to hear what the state psychologist has to say about his potential for rehabilitation. Yeah. So let's talk about the crafting part of the show. Last night, oh my God, I opened some friend mail. There's the video here. And I couldn't put it down last night. I was done painting till 2 o'clock in the morning. Yeah. It is my channel logo. Look at that. Yes, I've got release papers on there, but I started down in the corner. What I'm doing is wherever there's gold, like up here and smattered around, I'm using gold metallic. And the white part of it, I'm replacing the white with a white AB that kind of has that beautiful shimmer to it. Look at that. All the pinks in here. And the popsicle, the rainbow popsicle, which is my nod to LGBTQ, um, that's going to be glow in the dark. Isn't that awesome? Everything is awesome. Okay, yeah. Oh, and the lettering, I'm going to do that in black crystal. Instead of 310, I have ordered some black crystals to go there. Yeah. And that will be hanging up behind me once I get it done for future shows. Isn't that cool? Yeah. All right, guys. That's it for today. It's Thursday. Have a great day, everybody. And I will see you tomorrow. We're going to do a true crime story, the one I've been promising you for a while. I want to take a look at those Gilgo Beach murders. Yeah, we haven't gone there yet. Let's go there. Long Island. Yeah. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye, everybody.